And cloud computing has been growing for quite a while now. It has been displacing the traditional data center at an extremely rapid rate, and for good reasons that we're going to discuss. It's basically built around this idea of, rather than having a lot of small data centers all over the place for all different kinds of companies, we're going to have some really, really large data centers that are capable of being rented out as a commodity. If I want to start a company, I don't necessarily need to have my own data center, my own network admins or server admins or any of these things. I'm just going to have my software developers and my marketing, and we're going to create all of our servers on servers that we rent from a large data center in the cloud. Cloud is always on. That's the idea anyway. It's not always perfect. Nothing's always perfect, right? It's kind of like System Z saying zero downtime. It's the ideal, and it's most of the time, and it's way better than what came before it, but no system is ever perfect. And you're only going to pay for what you need. Now, this is huge, because if I'm starting up a company and I'm building my widget, and I have enough to worry about building my widget, I don't want to have to drop $1 million on a data center. So instead of having that huge upfront cost and capital, I'm going to maybe or maybe not over the long run pay more, but that's honestly debatable, but definitely not as much at the beginning. I'm going to pay for what I use and what I need. And actually, I can manage that pretty ideally, because I can scale up or down my capacity as things change. Let's take a look at how this kind of plays out, traditional versus cloud. So if we look at the traditional kind of how we buy hardware, how we think about planning for the future, it would look something like this, where we say there's some amount of time in which we plan. So let's just say each one of these bars on the graph represents a year. So every year I'm going to plan to buy new hardware. Now, in reality, it might even be more likely 2 years, but let's just use a year, make it nice and simple here. So I have 4 years projected. So I project at the beginning of year one that over the next 4 years, this is going to be my forecasted need in infrastructure. Now, that's very hard to do. It's very hard to guess, 4 years out what the world's going to look like, but I'm going to take my best stab at it. But because it's so hard, I'm only going to buy my hardware in 1 year increments, right? So I'm going to decide here at the beginning of year one how much hardware to buy for the end of year one. But because I have to buy it for the end of year one, and I'm only buying once a year, I have to buy at the level that I predict that I'll be at. So what happens here is I start the year only at 40% utilization, and I end the year at 100, I hope. Because if I got it wrong, I either don't have enough hardware, or I'm still underutilizing and I have even more surplus, right? So this is a very hard thing to get right. And we tend to then oversize. And what that leads to is even more surplus. And this surplus is money wasted, because we've spent more money on hardware that we're not actually using. And this cycle repeats year after year after year. Now, the reality of what our usage actually looks like ends up like something like this, where, we have a good day or week or month because a good news story comes out and there's a huge surge of people, and then it dies off and we had a bug in our software and it crashed and people weren't happy and now people aren't using our software, and then something goes right again. Or maybe we just, are in a market where it fluctuates at different times. So you end up with this wave of actual use that doesn't really coincide with the straight linear line you thought was going to happen. So we have a surplus, just like we did before. It just doesn't always match up with the surplus that we had in our original prediction. But even worse, we have a deficit. These were times that we did not have the resources that we needed. And this means that most likely our systems weren't working, if at all, not properly. And sometimes not at all. Sometimes you throw way too large a load at some software and the software just crashes. And at the most critical times, those moments when the most people were trying to learn about my product, buy it, whatever it was, my services did not have the resources they need to stay running. So that's an even worse situation. Now, if I use the cloud, what we can do is we can use that scaling property that we were talking about to automatically create new servers and scale up and then remove them when we don't need them and scale down, and we keep right to this line. We only use exactly what we need.